But we need to start with the big news that came out on Monday night, that the former Alabama quarterback, the number one overall pick of the Carolina Panthers, supposedly his first season there, which went dreadfully, was a blip. They brought in a new head coach in Dave Canales into Carolina. He was going to fix all their problems. He'd fixed Baker Mayfield the year before. 2 games into the season, Bryce Young is benched. Phoebe, just tell me from a football perspective, what did you see this weekend that made you think, yeah, maybe that's the right call?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things. And I mean, ultimately, he's just not seeing the field. I mean, if you watch him, he's just in straight panic mode most of the time, missing throws. I mean, he's unable to even get his footwork straight, and that's half the battle to getting the ball out. So I think this has been something that's been coming for a long time now. It was just interesting to hear that head coach Dave Canales was saying only 24 hours previous, he's definitely starting week 3. And then 24 hours later, he's definitely not starting week 3.
They invested a huge amount to get this guy, right? 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks. DJ Moore, who is basically a first-round pick in himself in terms of the quality of the wide receiver they sent to the Bears as well, who's looked great in their offense over the last 18 months. To invest that much and to make the decision to move on so quickly, what's behind that? This doesn't just feel like it's a simple football decision, Brian.
I'm hearing a lot of good things. Everything that you both said was 100% right. There's one name that's missing, though, and it's the name that always matters in these situations. It is the owner. It is David Tepper. David Tepper has completely screwed this up. If you want to blame somebody, it's not your head coach who you just hired who's had 2 games. It's not Bryce Young, who was put into this situation and didn't have a great team around him last year. You cannot bench him after 2 games if he is your franchise quarterback. So that is a failure by the organization, not Bryce Young. In the end, though, that is on the owner. He pushed this. He forced this. He wanted Bryce Young. This was an organizational miss, and then you compare it to what the Texans were able to do with C.J. Stroud, and it looks even worse because the Carolina Panthers trade everything, take Bryce Young at number 1. The Texans get it 100% right with C.J. Stroud at number 2, and that makes it look even worse. But it's not on Young, and it's not on your head coach. It is on your owner, who has absolutely failed as an owner.
But I think you're spot on, because when they were going to the draft, the owner and the head coach were not on the same page, and you cannot be investing that much.
Frank Reich. I mean, because this has nothing to do with Canales.
No.
This goes back to Frank Reich.
Absolutely.
Frank Reich lost his job because Bryce Young wasn't developing. No, that's because your head coach and your owner were not on the same page.
Exactly. He didn't want to take Bryce Young, and so when you're in that position, you can't be bringing on somebody that you don't believe in, especially at your first round. So it does. It ultimately does all come back to Dave Tepper, and I think that bringing Canales in there was great. You know, like you said, he helped Baker Mayfield. He's helped Russell Wilson before that. But there's only so much that you can do. And I think ultimately he just needs to sit. It's like Simone Biles, the gymnast, and she calls it the spins, isn't it?
The twisties.
The twisties. That's what he's experiencing right now, the football twisties.
I'm not sure he is experiencing the football twisties. I think he is not built to exist in the NFL. And from the perspective of, this is a guy who is 5'10", playing behind an offensive line where the shortest of guys is 6'3", many of them 6'7". Guys who are 7, 8, 9 inches taller than him. That makes it very difficult to see over the middle of the field. Whenever you see a short quarterback come into the NFL, any guy under 6 foot, they always cite Drew Brees and they always cite Russell Wilson, right? Drew Brees, for me, is the exception that proves the rule. He is the guy who is the 1 in the million. He is the guy who, he also had a Hall of Fame level head coach who is an offensive genius there as well. So he is the guy who, yes, great, he could do it. Russell Wilson goes into Seattle, has the best running game we've seen in the last 10 years, one of the best defenses we've seen in the last 10 years, a really good offensive line. And guess what happened to Russell Wilson once he lost all those pieces? He wasn't very good anymore. Russell Wilson is at this point tanking a Hall of Fame career. He is no longer going to Canton as things stand. And that is because actually, once he decided, I want to play in the pocket, I don't want to scramble anymore, I don't want to do those things that made me special, he's not special anymore. And I think with Bryce Young, he has gone into a much, much more difficult situation than Russell Wilson ever did. And he's a guy who, unless you put him in the perfect situation, he's going to struggle to succeed with his size and his height.
Russell Wilson was pretty darn good for a while, though. Russell Wilson wasn't just good because he had a good defense and he had a good running game. He had Pete Carroll as his coach. Russell Wilson was a really good quarterback. I would say, look at Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray isn't the tallest guy in the world. We're going to get to him in a bit. He just had a perfect passer rating. But I think your overall point is right. Bryce Young was a total question mark coming out. But the interesting part is that the Houston Texans would have taken Bryce Young if they had lucked into the number 1 overall pick. But the questions are always there about his height. You heard that when he was dominating in college. Would he be tall enough? And Will, I think you were 100% right. He has not been. I can blame the owner. We can talk about the head coach, the system, all these things. He has not been good enough, and he has some limitations I don't know if he can overcome.
But I think, look, the height, ultimately, it's not like these kids get to the NFL and all of a sudden they grow. Like, you still the same size offensive lineman, maybe some taller people, but ultimately you're still dealing with the same height of person. So that was his conversation. You know, everyone was asking him coming to the draft. And he's like, I've been playing with this my whole life. Like, I understand but the thing was, he had the IQ. He was so smart, his ability to pull a room together. We've not seen any of that. He's so lost in himself,
It doesn't look like he's just completely lost his confidence.
Exactly.
You know, whether it comes from the head coach, the firing of Frank Reich, all the changes, the instability, whatever it is. I look at that, and we can break down the reads and pull out the all 22 and all these things. I just see a quarterback, whether he's at the podium or whether he is running the offense, he looks like he has zero confidence. And I'm sure that Dave Canales ran that tape and he saw the same exact thing.
Yeah. I still think, from a Carolina perspective, that situation for me at this point is untenable for everything you guys have said. And to give some context to Dave Tepper, this is a man who not only forced his previous head coach to draft the quarterback he didn't want. There was a question asked to Dave Canales at the podium yesterday of, did Dave Tepper have any say in this decision? And he didn't say no. He danced around it and said, I'd rather keep that conversation private. That, to me, sounds like Dave Tepper had some say in the fact that he's benching Bryce Young. And look, Dave Tepper is a guy who threw a drink at a Jaguars fan at a game. This is a billionaire who owns the team and was petty enough to throw a drink at a fan who went into a Carolina restaurant who were making a joke about their own team on a sign outside and threatened to buy the restaurant and shut it down. This is a petty, petty man. He has got his expensive toy. We joked about this with Jerry Jones last week. He's going to run it as he wants. I think it's untenable for Dave Canales, and I think it's probably untenable for Bryce Young. The question is then, can this number 1 overall pick, who has got a lot of talent, who has done great things, Heisman winner, national championship winner in college, all those wonderful things, can he turn it around? And Phoebe, is there a situation in the NFL, somebody who might come in and throw a low-round pick at them, someone who might think to themselves, I can rebuild this man?
I mean, I definitely think that there is, and I think that, but I still, even just where he is now, right? Let's say they keep him at the Panthers. He just needs time. We heard Tom Brady talk about how it's a tragedy of how they're treating the young quarterbacks nowadays. And again, this conversation comes up time and time again because you have C.J. Stroud who goes and disproves all of this. Then you have someone like Bryce Young and even Caleb Williams to a certain element who are struggling. Trevor Lawrence was the same way, right? Until you get the right foundations around him and you get the right support around him, he is never going to get better, but he needs time. And he's not had a great offensive line. He's not had your star wideouts. He's not had any of that to help him be successful.
Is there a landing spot, Brian? The one that stands out to me, and we've talked a lot about Tua last week, we're still waiting to find out what the conversation is about his future. With Mike McDaniels, with the offensive weapons they have there, with a scheme that is designed for a grip it and rip it quarterback who can just get the ball out quickly and has a first read, that's the one place where I think if Miami throw a 6th round pick at Carolina and they go, yeah, fine, let's just cut our losses, maybe I can still see him working in the NFL.
Yeah, my problem is, I think that's an interesting idea, but that to me would be long term. You're not going to make that change mid-season. Bryce Young has lost all of his confidence. He needs to be completely rebuilt. He needs to get away from the game and come back and go to an island somewhere and have a big think and figure it all out. He is not going to be able to be anyone's starter until the offseason. I don't see any other NFL team saying, that's the guy that we're going to trade a pick for and turn everything over to him when he's been so bad. There's nothing, if you're a scout, if you're a coach, if you're a GM, that you're watching the game tape, because that's what it all comes down to. The game tape is your proof. You know that. You watch that, he's not an NFL starter right now. So he has to be completely rebuilt from the head to the toes, and that takes time.